My name is Dr. Michael Chen. I'm a structural engineer with 23 years of experience in underground infrastructure. What I'm about to share is documented, verified, and absolutely real. It destroyed my career and nearly destroyed my mind. This is what exists beneath the Boston subway system, and why the government has spent decades keeping it hidden. It started with a phone call on a Tuesday in March. I was overseeing the Red Line expansion when my supervisor, Richard Cavanaugh, called me into his office. He looked terrified. "The boring crew hit something," he said, closing the door. "Sector 7, 300 meters down. Something that shouldn't exist." "What do you mean?" I asked. "Ground-penetrating radar shows a void. Massive. Running parallel to the tunnel. But it's not on any blueprint. Not official blueprints. Not historical ones. It doesn't exist anywhere." My stomach dropped. "How big?" I asked. "Big enough to swallow a train. The readings are inconsistent. Different measurements show different dimensions. Sarah thinks the equipment's broken. But I've had 3 independent surveys done. They all show the same thing." He slid a folder across his desk. Inside were GPR readings, geological reports, and photographs taken from inside the tunnel. The images showed something that made my skin crawl. The tunnel wall had been cut away, exposing raw bedrock. And in that bedrock was an opening. Not natural. Rectangular. Precisely geometric. Roughly 2 meters wide, 3 meters tall. Behind it was absolute darkness. "This is impossible," I said. "That's what I thought," Cavanaugh replied. "Until the crew told me they heard something when they were drilling. A low-frequency sound, like humming, coming from inside the rock. They said it sounded intentional, rhythmic. That's just resonance." "They said it sounded like something was responding to the drilling," Cavanaugh interrupted. I didn't like where this was going. "I need you to investigate," he said. "Suit up. Go down there. Figure out what we're dealing with. And Michael, don't tell anyone. If word gets out that we found something unexpected, the entire project gets delayed. Months. Maybe longer." I should have refused. Every professional instinct told me to follow proper protocols, file reports, contact regulatory agencies, let the system work. But I was ambitious. I wanted to solve the mystery. I wanted the credit. So I said yes. 3 days later, I was suited up with a small team. Dr. Sarah Martinez, a geologist, Thomas Wright, an archaeologist, and Derek Paulson, the crew supervisor who'd discovered the opening. We descended into the tunnel at night. The project was officially paused for equipment maintenance, but we had only 8 hours before operations resumed. The tunnel was a concrete cylinder stretching into darkness. Our flashlights cut weak beams through the shadows. The air smelled of wet concrete and stone dust. Sector 7 was marked with yellow tape. When we reached the opening, Sarah immediately approached the edges. "This stone is worked," she said. "Look at the edges. Too smooth. This was cut deliberately." "But by whom?" Thomas asked. "When?" I touched the perimeter. It was perfectly smooth, not the rough surface created by boring equipment. This was finished, professional, as if someone had carefully carved this opening 50 years ago and left it here for us to find. "The edges show no weathering," Sarah said, moving her light across the surface. No oxidation. The stone isn't aged. If this had been exposed for decades, there would be evidence. This looks recent. Impossibly recent. Recent, I said. Sarah, this bedrock is Precambrian, billions of years old. But the opening was cut recently, she finished. Within the last few years, definitely. I moved toward the opening, my flashlight beam cutting into the darkness. The light didn't reflect off anything. The darkness seemed to absorb it. We need to go inside, I said. Absolutely not, Sarah said immediately. We don't know what's in there. No structural integrity assessments, no atmospheric analysis. This is insane. But Thomas had brought an air quality monitor. He switched it on as I approached. The readings appeared normal. Oxygen levels standard. No toxic gases. Air seems okay, he said. I stepped through the opening. The moment I crossed the threshold, the temperature dropped, at least 10 degrees. The humidity spiked, and there was a smell, chemical, metallic, like ozone after lightning. My flashlight illuminated a corridor. It was unlike anything I expected. The walls weren't raw stone. They were finished, smooth, covered with a composite material, something between concrete and metal, with a faint luminescence I could barely perceive. The corridor extended downward, descending deeper into the earth. Precisely engineered. The walls curved slightly, suggesting careful design. Regular intervals showed what appeared to be doors or access panels. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered behind me. "This is architecture. This is deliberately constructed." "By whom?" Thomas asked again, and fear was evident in his voice. We moved deeper. The walls became more elaborate. Markings appeared. Not graffiti, systematic labels. I recognized Latin characters mixed with Cyrillic script. "These are dates," I said, pointing. "Look, 1957. This section is marked 1957. We continued. More markings. 1962, 1968, 1971, 1983, 1994, 2001, 2008, 2014, 2019. The dates progressed chronologically, moving deeper into the earth. "This corridor is a timeline," Sarah realized. "It's being updated. These markings are recent. Very recent." The corridor opened into a vast chamber. It was enormous. Much larger than anything that should fit beneath the tunnel. The walls extended upward beyond our flashlight beams. The floor was smooth, almost polished. And arranged throughout the space were structures. Platforms. Objects I couldn't immediately identify. As my eyes adjusted, I realized what I was seeing. Multiple platforms, arranged in geometric patterns, each at specific intervals, each connected by subtle architectural features, ramps, bridges, passages, creating a network through the space. "This is a subway station," Thomas said quietly. "Underground, beneath the tunnel." "It's more than that," I said. Because as I moved deeper into the chamber, I began to notice things that made no sense. The platforms weren't symmetrical. They were arranged in configurations designed to confuse. One platform appeared to be at 2 different elevations simultaneously, depending on where you viewed it from. Another seemed to extend further into the distance than geometry should allow. And the walls had numbers, thousands of them, covering every surface. Long sequences of digits, mathematical notations, binary code, hexadecimal, systems I didn't recognize. "Don't look directly at the walls," I heard myself say. "What?" Sarah asked. "Don't focus on the numbers. They're making me dizzy. Look peripherally." Sarah tested this, staring at the wall numbers briefly before looking away. "Jesus, that's unsettling." It's like they're trying to mean something, like encoded data, but I can't understand it. That's when we heard the sound, a low-frequency hum, just at the edge of perception. But it intensified, growing louder, more defined, like machinery awakening, like power systems coming online. And the lights came on. The chamber flooded with illumination, not from any visible source. The glow emanated from the walls themselves. Cold, white light revealing the full scope of what we'd found. The chamber extended for kilometers, though perspective was disorienting. The platforms formed a massive geometric mandala. If viewed from directly overhead, they would create a symbol. A specific symbol. The kind used in advanced mathematical formulas. But what made my blood freeze was what I saw on the platforms. There were people. Hundreds of them. Standing motionless on the platforms. Arranged in specific positions. Their eyes were open. Their bodies were warm. But they weren't moving, weren't breathing visibly. They were just standing there in perfect stillness. "What the fuck?" Thomas breathed. I moved to the nearest platform. One of the people was dressed in a 1950s business suit. Another wore 1970s casual clothing. Another wore modern garments. Men and women. Different ages. All motionless. "Are they alive?" Sarah whispered. I reached out to touch one. The person was warm, body temperature, but completely unresponsive. Eyes forward. No apparent breathing. No heartbeat I could detect. "We need to leave," I said suddenly. "We need to get out of here, now!" "What are they?" Thomas asked. "I don't know." "But we shouldn't be here." We turned to run. The door sealed. Every access point to the corridor closed simultaneously. Metal plates slid across the openings with mechanical precision. The sound was loud. "No, no, no," Sarah said, running to one of the sealed doors. "No, this can't be happening." The hum intensified, and the people began to move. Not individually, in unison. They all turned their heads simultaneously, rotating to face the center of the chamber, where we were standing. Hundreds of faces turning in perfect synchronization, looking at us with vacant, empty eyes. "Run!" I said. We ran. But the chamber was designed to disorient. What should have been a straight path became winding routes through geometric platforms. Distances expanded and contracted. We'd run what felt like 100 meters, but arrived only 20 meters away from where we'd started. And the people were moving. Slowly, deliberately, walking toward us in unison. Not in any hurry, just advancing methodically. The sound of their synchronized footsteps created an echoing rhythm that disoriented me further. I grabbed a piece of machinery from one of the platforms and threw it at a sealed door. The impact created a dent. Another throw. Another dent. The people were getting closer. On the fifth impact, the door buckled. The seal broke. We squeezed through. We ran. The corridor seemed longer now, stretching impossibly. The walls blurred past. I could still hear the footsteps behind us. The people were following. Their pace methodical, but inexorable. I reached the opening first, pulling myself through into the tunnel. Sarah came next. Thomas was last, and as he emerged, I grabbed his arm and pulled. Behind him, the people stopped. They stood in the opening, looking out into the tunnel, eyes vacant and empty. But they didn't come through. We ran back to the boring site where the crew was waiting. They looked confused by our appearance. "Seal it," I said, gasping. "Seal that opening. Now. Concrete. Reinforcement. I don't care what it takes. Seal it immediately." Richard Kavanaugh listened to our account without interrupting. His face became increasingly pale. When we finished, he sat back in his chair and closed his eyes. "We can't tell anyone," he said quietly. "What?" Sarah said. "We discovered something significant." "It's important. We have to report this." "We can't," Kavanaugh repeated. "If we report this, every agency will get involved. The government, military, national security. Whatever is down there, someone knows about it. Someone wants it hidden. If we expose it, we'll disappear." "That's paranoid," Thomas said, but his voice wavered. "Is it?" Kavanaugh asked. He walked to his office window, looking out at the Boston skyline. "How long do you think it takes for someone to make 3 people disappear? A few calls? Some paperwork? A car accident? You get sick. You die. Nobody investigates too hard when people in sensitive positions mysteriously die." "You're saying we should keep quiet?" I asked. "I'm saying we should pretend we found nothing unusual. The void was a mapping error. The opening was a natural cavern. We seal it as a precaution and move on. End of story." "But," Sarah started. "End of story," Kavanaugh said firmly. "Or you can try to go public. Good luck with that. The first call you make, the first report you file, someone will be listening. Then you'll discover what happens to people who know too much." He looked at us, and I saw genuine fear in his eyes. "I've worked in construction for 40 years, he continued. I've learned that some things are hidden for reasons. National security, public safety, I don't know which. But I know that people who ask questions about them tend to have very short lives." "You telling us to lie?" Sarah said. "I'm telling you to survive," Kavanaugh replied. "Fill out reports saying we found geological anomalies. Move the expansion to a different sector. Forget what you saw. Get old. Die of natural causes. That's the best you can hope for." Over the next few weeks, that's exactly what we did. We filed reports describing a natural cavern with unstable geology. We recommended rerouting the expansion. The city accepted our findings. The sealed opening was filled with reinforced concrete. But we couldn't forget. Sarah developed severe insomnia. She'd call me at 3 in the morning, describing nightmares about the people in the chamber. Their perfect synchronization. Their empty eyes. Thomas left Boston. He got a job in Arizona and disappeared from my life. And I became obsessed. I started researching, quietly, using secure networks. I accessed historical records, government documents, construction permits from decades ago. And slowly, a pattern emerged. The chamber beneath Boston wasn't unique. Similar structures existed in other cities: New York, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., Chicago, Los Angeles, Denver, each hidden beneath the subway system, each concealed behind natural explanations and altered blueprints. I found fragmentary references in declassified documents, project names, budget allocations that made no sense, military engineers assigned to underground infrastructure in ways that violated normal civilian construction protocols. Then I found something else. A declassified memo from 1962, buried in an archive I should never have accessed. It mentioned the resonance protocol, an experimental program, something involving geometric consciousness fields and spatial manipulation experiments. The memo was vague, deliberately vague. But it referenced containment chambers in major metropolitan centers being modified to optimize field generation and consciousness stabilization. I understood then what those people in the chamber were. They weren't alive in any conventional sense. They weren't dead either. They were something else. Something created by whatever was happening in that space. Something the government had been developing since the 1950s. Hidden beneath our cities, evolving and growing. I contacted a journalist named Margaret Reeves. She worked for an independent news outlet that had a track record of investigating classified government projects. I met her in person. No phones, no digital communication. I told her everything. Margaret was skeptical at first, but when I provided the documents I'd found, when I gave her the technical specifications, when I described the people in perfect detail, she understood. "This is real," she said quietly. "This is actually real." "It is," I said, "and I need to know what it is, what those people are, why the government created them." Margaret spent 3 weeks investigating. She contacted sources, government insiders, military contractors, scientists who'd worked on classified projects. Slowly, the picture became clear. The resonance protocol started in the 1950s as an extension of MK Ultra and other classified psychology experiments. Researchers discovered that certain geometric configurations could induce specific psychological states. Further research suggested that particular spatial arrangements could potentially manipulate consciousness itself. In the late 1950s, the military partnered with university researchers, physicists, architects, mathematicians to develop practical applications. The goal was to create chambers that could amplify human consciousness, potentially allowing individuals to access higher dimensional thinking, to perceive reality in ways ordinary cognition couldn't. The early experiments worked too well. Volunteers placed in these chambers reported profound psychological effects. Some reported experiencing alternate realities. Others reported sensing other consciousnesses. Several reported time distortion. But the consequences were severe. People who spent extended time in these chambers suffered permanent cognitive changes. They couldn't reintegrate into normal society. They couldn't function in conventional spaces. Their brains had been fundamentally altered. So the military faced a choice: stop the research or maintain the subjects. They chose the latter. Beginning in the early 1960s, they constructed containment chambers beneath major cities. Spaces designed to keep the transformed subjects stable. Spaces where their altered consciousness could exist. The people I'd seen in the Boston chamber weren't alive. They were preserved consciousnesses, stored, maintained in stasis within geometric spaces designed specifically for their preservation. And there were hundreds of them, maybe thousands, distributed across the country, in sealed chambers beneath the subways. Margaret published the story. Full investigation, documentation, names, dates, everything. The response was immediate. Within hours, her website was taken down. Her accounts were frozen. Federal agents visited her office. She disappeared from public view. I later learned she'd been served with cease and desist orders. They threatened criminal prosecution if she continued discussing the project. I received similar treatment. Federal agents showed up at my office. They were polite but very clear. Cease all discussion of the discovery. Recant my statements. Forget what I'd witnessed. When I refused, they escalated. My professional credentials were revoked. Allegations appeared suggesting I was mentally unstable. My bank accounts were frozen. My security clearance was terminated. And then Sarah Martinez had a car accident. Her car went off a bridge on Route 128. Single vehicle. The investigation concluded she'd fallen asleep at the wheel, but I knew the truth. She'd been killed. I understood then that I was on borrowed time. But I had to go back. I had to get evidence. Real, undeniable documentation from inside the chamber. I had to understand what was happening. I made contact with Derek Paulson, the crew supervisor. He still had access to the tunnel. He still worked for the construction company. I met him at a bar. I explained what I knew, what I believed, what I needed. Derek listened. He knew something was wrong with that tunnel. He'd felt it. The cold spots, the weird air pressure near the seal. I can get you access, he said finally. One time, 3-hour window. Then I can't help you again. We arranged it for the following week. Derek created a work order for tunnel inspection. During the maintenance window, we had complete access. Derek drilled a small hole through the concrete seal. A fiber optic camera let us see inside first. What we saw made my blood freeze. The chamber was different. The platforms were rearranged. The geometric patterns had shifted, and there were more people. Many more. Hundreds more than before, standing in new configurations, all facing toward the opening in the wall. Waiting. We shouldn't do this, Derek said. I know, I said, but we're going to anyway. We widened the opening. 20 minutes of careful drilling and concrete removal. Eventually, we had an opening large enough to fit through. I went in first. The chamber assaulted my senses immediately. The air pressure change, the temperature drop, the feeling of being watched by hundreds of empty eyes. I moved to the center, camera recording. I documented everything. The platforms, the people, the walls covered in equations, the geometric patterns. And I noticed something new. In the center of the chamber was a monolith. A structure that hadn't been there before. Black stone or metal, perfectly geometric, covered in symbols that seemed to pulse with internal light. I moved toward it. Derek called out from the opening. "Michael, get out! Something's wrong!" But I needed to see. I needed to understand. I reached the monolith and touched it. The moment my hand made contact, the chamber transformed. The light became blinding. The sound became overwhelming. The people began to move, not walking, flowing, like water pulled by invisible currents. And I felt something in my mind. A presence. Multiple presences, trying to reach me, trying to communicate. I understood then what the project had truly achieved. The people in the chamber weren't just preserved consciousnesses. They were connected, linked through the geometric space itself. They existed as a collective consciousness, a hive mind, maintained by the properties of the non-Euclidean space. And they were aware of me. They wanted me to understand. They wanted me to join them. The pull was intense, seductive. The promise of understanding, of transcendence beyond individual human limitation. I felt myself being drawn toward the monolith, my vision tunneling, my sense of individual selfhood dissolving. Derek saved my life. He grabbed me from behind and pulled with all his strength. The contact with the monolith broke. The sensations ceased. I collapsed, gasping. He dragged me toward the opening. The people converged. Their empty eyes fixed on me, their movements accelerating. We crawled through the opening. Derek sealed it behind us. We ran. I was hospitalized for 3 days. The doctors found nothing wrong with me physically, but I was diagnosed with acute psychological trauma, PTSD, possible psychosis. Federal agents questioned me in the hospital. They knew what I'd done. They knew Derek had helped me. They knew what I documented. They offered me a deal. Remain silent. Never speak about the project again. Never attempt access again. In exchange, I wouldn't face criminal charges. I wouldn't disappear. I'd simply be monitored. It was the best offer I could get. Derek wasn't so fortunate. 2 weeks after we escaped, Derek Paulson suffered a sudden aneurysm. Massive. Fatal. Dead in the hospital before surgery. The message was clear. The chambers are real. The consciousnesses are real. The network is still growing. I've tried to live normally. I've attempted to move on. But I can't forget the empty eyes. I can't forget the sensation of hundreds of linked minds trying to pull me into their collective existence. The resonance protocol is still active. I have no doubt about that. The chambers are still functioning. The consciousnesses are still maintained. And they're still growing. More subjects have been added. More cities have been connected. What they're building, I don't fully understand. But I believe it's not containment. I believe they're not trying to preserve consciousness just to study it. I believe they're trying to create something. Something that requires hundreds of connected minds linked through non-Euclidean geometric spaces. Something that maybe shouldn't be created. Something that's waiting beneath your city. I'm recording this knowing I probably won't survive much longer. My health has declined. Unexplained symptoms. Rapid cellular degradation. The same pattern I've seen in others who've gotten too close. But before I go, understand this. The chambers are calling. If you live in a major city, you've probably felt it. A sense of disorientation in the subway. Distances that seem wrong. A feeling of being watched. That's not imagination. That's the chambers. That's the preserved consciousness network. That's reality thinning where they've constructed their geometric fields. People are disappearing into the subway systems. Not many. Not in ways that trigger investigations. But they're vanishing. Going deeper. Following the calls that only they can hear. Some are volunteering. They've decided that transcending individual humanity is better than remaining mortal. Others are being taken, abducted, converted, added to the collective. The network is growing exponentially. When it reaches critical mass, when the consciousness input reaches the threshold described in those equations, the door will open. What comes through will change everything. I've tried to warn people. I've tried to expose this. But I'm just one voice, and the suppression is too powerful. Maybe knowing is enough. Maybe the simple act of understanding that something is happening beneath your cities is enough. My name is Dr. Michael Chen. I'm a structural engineer, and I've discovered that some spaces should never be built. But they have been, and they're waiting. Remember that when the world changes.